Hello, I'm Aishwarya, and today we are going to talk about why you should consider traveling solo not once, twice, but at least thrice in your life. I'll get into the details soon, but if you're someone who is planning a trip sometime next week or within the next few months, I have a video based on solo trip essentials, where I give a lot of valuable information about the important things that you should consider before traveling solo. And especially if you're a woman, do have a look at that video and then hop on to this one. And if you're someone who wants to go on a solo trip but you're not in a rush as of now, but you do plan to go on a solo trip soon, then stay here with me. I have a lot of ground to cover and you're going to have a lot of fun, and this is going to be worth your time. So let's get started. So when I went on my first solo trip, to be honest, it was more about getting that stamp on my passport. We have all been there, right? I don't think I'm the only one who feels like that on their first trip. But for me, honestly, that was more about getting a stamp. And of course, I was also very excited to visit the country, to just be there. And I had watched a lot of I'd done a lot of research and I'd watched a lot of videos where they talk about on solo trips you meet a lot of new people and you talk to them, have a lot of conversations. So I was looking forward to all of that, and some of it did happen. So I was more of an enthu cutlet, I would say, someone who was very excited to experience everything, document everything on my first solo trip. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that first solo trips are mostly about that. You're way too excited, you're a bit anxious and confused, but you also want to give into the place that you are in and enjoy to the fullest. So that's more about the first solo trips that you take. And when I went on my second one, the experience was slightly different, because on my first solo trip during evenings, because I was in a country where the nightlife was not that great, so I had to be in my room, so I had a lot of time for self-reflection. But I went for 5 to 6 days, and after the third or fourth day, honestly, I was feeling a bit lonely and bored in the evening, because how much will I reflect on? And also, I was not used to the idea of being alone in evenings in a new country. So yes, that was a bit of something like a learning for me on my first solo trip, and I did better on my second one. I found out ways to make it better, so I'll dive into that soon. And when I felt lonely, I'd also like talk to my parents or talk to my friends and family, and usually depend on others in a way to feel normal in the evenings, like to feel less lonely, not normal, less lonely. So so in during my first solo trip, I was learning things about myself, like, okay, this is what I like, this is what I do not like, this is what I struggle with. So my first solo trip was more on those lines, and I came back with a happy heart. It's not like I was very upset or something. I came back with a happy heart, but some lessons which I plan to do better during my second solo trip. So on my second solo trip, definitely it was no longer about the stamp. It was more about experiencing the country and experiencing the life of the locals and understanding their history and understanding why they eat certain type of food. So more about the heritage and legacy and the current things that are going on in their country. It was more of from truly exploration basis. So this time, what I thought of doing differently was, and which I recommend to other people as well if you're planning a solo trip, is book a museum tour in that country itself on your very first day. So this is what I did on my second solo trip. I booked a museum tour. So I got a lot of ideas about the places that I should visit. I already had an itinerary. So I'm a very itinerary sort of a person. I like to know how I would spend my each day because it's a solo travel. So I had an itinerary, but the advantage of doing that museum tour is often during your research you will not pick up some of the things that only those people residing in that country know. So they'll tell you about a lot of spots that are of historical importance or that are more beautiful but not known by many. So you could visit those and add to your itinerary, and maybe you could pull some of the spots out from your existing itinerary and put the more interesting ones. So do book a museum tour in the country that you're going to if it's available. It's, trust me, you're not going to regret doing it. And then after the museum tour, of course, I added a few things which I had not added earlier, and I took out some of the less interesting ones which I had found out during my research. And one thing about having an itinerary is, after my solo trips, I realized you do not have to be very rigid about the itinerary that you have created. Just keep it so that you can fall back on in case you don't find any interesting places, or just to have a plan, sort of to have a backup plan. Okay, that these are the things that I will visit. Because if you're free to explore during your solo travels, you will find out learning a lot more about yourself and the country. What I mean to say is, if you come across any cafe, suppose you're just exploring on your own and you come across one cafe or a shop and you honestly feel so good and cozy in that place, or if you find anything about that place very interesting and you want to spend more time, do give yourself the leeway to do that, because that is what you came to this trip for, to give yourself a break and to enjoy yourself, to enjoy your own company. So I learned that I don't need to be rigid about my itinerary, and be okay with being at one place for a longer time. Because on my first trip, I was a lot about, okay, I want to cover this and this and this on this day, and then next day I have to cover this. But on my second trip, I was a bit more relaxed. I was not much focused on exploring everything at once, but I was going at my pace, but also exploring. I was not just resting or chilling or something, but like more to my comfort, more that would cheer me up. So those are the kind of things that I did. I'd roam around, visit some spots, and make some conversations with locals as well, because we are often like told, or we often read and watch, that on your solo travels you're supposed to meet a lot of people and talk to locals and get to know them more. And what if you're an introvert? What if you don't like to do that? So don't force that upon yourself. If you're an extrovert and you're okay with doing that, and if you're okay to trust strangers, I would say that's when you would want to talk a lot to locals. Because let's be honest, you're on a solo trip, and if you're a woman, you need to be careful and you need to make sure that you're safe as well. So don't overshare about yourself. That's what I meant to say. Whenever you're talking to locals, get to know about the country and about other information, but don't overshare about yourself or your family. So that's one tip I would give you. And I would also try their food on my second solo trip, but the one thing I learned was not everything is going to suit my palate. So I would ask them about the main ingredients, and I would also ask them to make it a bit more spicy so that it's adjusted to my palate. So that's how I rolled with it on my second solo trip. And it was one of the lessons I learned from my first solo trip, because I was so excited about trying the local cuisine, I totally forgot that my palate is not it's not going to adjust to every cuisine. So just ensure that you're having a good time and ask them to add a few ingredients if according to your palate. And then I felt on my second solo trip, I think I did a very good job on planning. I planned better, because remember, on my first one I was a bit bored during the evenings. So this time I carried a book with myself, and I tried not to fight my loneliness by talking to other people or my family and friends. And I found out how to enjoy my own company and still feel better in the evenings just by myself, because that's the core purpose of solo travels, right? So This time what I did was I explored a lot of night markets, which was really interesting. I also enjoyed going back to my room and thinking about moments that I loved from the day. So, a bit of self reflection. You cannot do it every day, you will be bored, but it's very interesting to go through your travel documents, like not the documents, the documented moments, and going through the memories that you just created throughout the day and reliving them. There's kind of a very nice thing to do, in my opinion. And on my second solo trip, I didn't document every small thing, just the important ones. So I was not over excited about every single thing that I see. I just captured the important things that I would want to look back at, if I ever wanted to. And then I watched TV this time, not just to pass time, but because I wanted to feel refreshed and rejuvenated. So I did a lot of things by my choice. And I also spoke to friends and family, but that's because I missed them, not because I was feeling lonely. So a lot of changes that came into me, I feel, after the first and second solo trip. I think overall, in a nutshell, by the end of the second solo trip, I think I did my best. I was at my best, and I did something that I never did before on my third solo trip. So this is why I say you should consider traveling solo at least 3 times. So what I did the third time was I realized that on my first 2 trips I loved speaking to the locals, okay, but I was visiting these countries where English was not their native language, or they didn't understand English much. But I realized this about myself, that I loved knowing about the countries that I visited. So what I did was I hired a tourist guide just for myself, and this was the best decision I had taken in terms of my travel decisions, I feel, because the first 2 times I struggled a bit to understand what they meant. I understood it, but I struggled a bit. So I hired a English speaking tourist guide, and he was such a sweet guy, and he gave a lot of information which usually I wouldn't find out when I'm researching, because you don't dig deep into research when you're visiting a certain tourist spot or any place as such. But these people, because they live there, they know a lot about the history, and they can offer you advice from their years of experience. So that makes a lot of difference. You come back from your trip knowing a lot more about the place that you visited. And but the only disadvantage of having the tour guide was I felt like I missed having that evening time with self-reflection, because I was with him the whole time, and in the evening I'd be exhausted. So I had very less time for self-reflection. You see how it changes. So on my first solo trip, I was actually very anxious during evenings, and I was a bit lonely. But on my third solo trip, I was waiting for those moments when I would go back to my room and document and kind of analyze what I like and what I dislike about myself, about my travel decisions. So these subtle changes you will notice when you take, when you don't just take one solo trip but more than one solo trip. Of course, the decision of hiring or getting a tour guide varies from country to country. So if you are visiting a English speaking country, I think you don't need a tourist guide as such. But yes, that's something I would love to explore next time as well. The only thing I would do is I would kind of balance it out. So next time I'll have a tour guide just for 2 days or something, and rest of the days I'll manage on my own, so that I have the best of both worlds. So I have some time with them as well as I have some time with myself. So that's how I would approach it. So all in all, so my first trip was a mixed picture about getting that stamp, doing everything the touristy way, learning new things about myself, and coming back with a happy heart. Second trip was about throwing away all the ideal expectations of what we have from ourselves about traveling solo, and embracing how I am as a person, what are my travel preferences. So customizing it that way and coming back as someone who knows themselves better, who wants to explore the country and experience different perspectives. My third trip was being comfortable with myself, yet trying a lot of new things. So, stepping out of my comfort zone but trying new things, that's what I meant. And it was about continuing to discover new things about myself, my travel preferences, and truly exploring the countries at depth, not just for the sake of stamps anymore. So this was my bit on why you should travel solo at least 3 times. And again, I would like to do just a shameless plug of my earlier video. That's my cat. Of my earlier video. So if you're planning a trip sometime soon, do visit my video on solo essentials, and I'm sure you'll find a lot of value in that one. So I will see you soon, and do let me know if you found any interesting thing from this video, or you would like to add something from your point of perspective. I'm open to learning from everyone. So see you, and thank you for watching.